The internet is absolutely losing its mind right now, and you need to hear what just happened. Kanye West's new documentary just dropped, and there's footage of him screaming at Kris Jenner so aggressively that people are actually feeling sorry for the Kardashians. Yes, you read that correctly. Kim Kardashian, Kylie Jenner, the entire Kardashian empire is suddenly getting sympathy from the same people who spent years tearing them apart online. When Kanye West makes the internet defend Kim Kardashian and Kris Jenner, something has gone catastrophically wrong. This documentary, in whose name, is exposing details about Kanye, the Kardashians, and North West's father that nobody anticipated. Honestly, Kanye just demolished his own reputation using his own footage, and the spill sesh happening online is unlike anything we've seen before. If you're already hooked, smash that subscribe button because I promise my content is more reliable than Kanye's decision-making skills, which is genuinely saying something at this point. This documentary is nothing like your standard celebrity profile piece. Director Nico Ballesteros spent 6 complete years following Kanye around, from 2018 straight through 2024, capturing over 3,000 hours of raw footage. That's more surveillance than most intelligence agencies conduct on actual security threats. The film gives us unprecedented access to Kanye during his most vulnerable breakdowns, his most unhinged paranoid rant, and his most devastating self-destructive choices. Here's what makes this whole situation absolutely wild. This was originally supposed to be Kanye's redemption arc. He personally authorized this documentary release, genuinely believing it would help people finally understand his perspective and validate his actions. Instead, it became a masterclass demonstration of how to completely destroy your own legacy using evidence you willingly provided. The documentary essentially shows Kanye handing over the weapon with his fingerprints all over it, and then acting genuinely shocked when consequences finally arrive. The film opens by taking us back to the exact moment most people believe Kanye's public downfall truly began, that infamous 2009 VMA incident when he stormed the stage and interrupted Taylor Swift's acceptance speech. Everyone remembers it, the moment that launched 1,000 memes and basically wrote the playbook for every social media controversy that followed. But what most people don't realize is how that single moment of catastrophically poor judgment created a domino effect of self-destruction that's still toppling things over 15 years later. The documentary reveals that this incident resulted in the immediate cancellation of his planned tour with Lady Gaga. We're talking about millions of dollars disappearing overnight, evaporating into thin air. This wasn't just a temporary setback or one-time financial loss. It established a disturbing pattern where Kanye's most significant opportunities would consistently get obliterated by his own inability to control what comes out of his mouth and his complete failure to read social situations appropriately.
But the VMA disaster was merely the opening act of a much longer tragedy. The documentary takes an incredibly dark turn when it explores Kanye's ongoing mental health struggles, particularly focusing on his hospitalization back in 2016 after he abruptly canceled the remaining dates of his St. Pablo tour. This hospitalization becomes a haunting theme throughout the entire film, like an open wound that Kanye keeps deliberately ripping open just when it starts showing signs of healing. In one scene that's genuinely difficult to watch without feeling uncomfortable, we see Kanye casually tell Kim that he's been off his prescribed medication for several months and that stopping treatment is his calling from the universe. The man genuinely convinced himself that his mental health medication was somehow blocking his spiritual connection to some higher purpose or divine plan. He literally chose delusion and instability over treatment and stability because he genuinely believed it made him more authentic or connected to something greater than himself.
What makes this revelation even more heartbreaking is watching Kim Kardashian's visible reaction to these statements. You can see the absolute terror in her eyes as the reality hits her that the person she married and built a life with
is disappearing right in front of her, being gradually replaced by someone who mistakes paranoia for enlightenment and confuses instability with spiritual awakening. The documentary shows Kanye repeatedly bringing up his 2016 hospitalization throughout different time periods, but he never frames it as a mental health crisis that required professional treatment and intervention. Instead, he consistently reframes it as some kind of spiritual awakening or breakthrough that the media and even his own family refused to properly acknowledge or respect. The film brutally exposes how this traumatic experience fundamentally damaged his relationship with everyone who genuinely cared about him and fueled this deep, completely irrational distrust of the media and everyone working in the entertainment industry. Instead of viewing his hospitalization as a serious warning sign indicating he needed to prioritize his mental health and continue treatment, Kanye interpreted it as confirmation that the entire world was actively conspiring against him. This paranoid worldview would systematically poison every single relationship and professional opportunity that came afterward.
Things escalate to an even more uncomfortable level when the documentary examines Kanye's so-called political awakening, which started with his controversial decision to wear that red Trump hat back in 2018. We get exclusive behind-the-scenes footage of his infamous Saturday Night Live appearance, where he delivered an extended pro-Trump speech that left the entire cast and crew looking like they desperately wanted to disappear through the floor. The documentary captures Kanye claiming that SNL executives and producers tried to bully him and explicitly told him he couldn't wear the hat during his on-stage appearance, building this elaborate victim narrative that would eventually become the entire foundation of his identity moving forward. He desperately needed to position himself as the persecuted, misunderstood genius that the establishment was desperately trying to silence, because that narrative was far easier for him to accept than the simpler reality that he was just consistently making terrible decisions with predictable consequences.
This is where the footage becomes really uncomfortable and hard to watch. The film shows us exactly what happened immediately after that SNL performance, including an extremely tense confrontation between Kanye and cast member Michael Che. Che approaches Kanye in the backstage area, and you can immediately see he's frustrated and genuinely hurt by what just happened. He directly challenges Kanye on some of the specific things he said during his unplanned speech, particularly a comment about how every time there's a controversial black subject matter like the Bill Cosby situation, you automatically have to have a black comedian discussing it on air. Che clearly felt like this was a direct, personal attack aimed at him, and you can see the genuine pain in his face as he confronts Kanye about the implications. Kanye's response tells you absolutely everything you need to know about where his head was at during this period. Instead of apologizing, or even attempting to clarify what he actually meant, he immediately gets defensive and claims he wasn't talking specifically about Che at all. But Michael Che absolutely isn't buying this explanation. He pushes back harder, asking why Kanye felt the need to publicly call out the entire SNL cast on live television when they couldn't possibly defend themselves in the moment, especially considering they had always enthusiastically supported him and consistently given him a platform whenever he needed one. The conversation escalates so intensely that someone off camera eventually has to physically step in and explicitly ask the camera crew to stop recording, but not before we clearly see Kanye's complete inability to handle any form of criticism or take any responsibility for the actual impact of his words on people who genuinely cared about him and his well-being.
Throughout this entire political phase, the documentary reveals something that's genuinely disturbing when you think about it critically. Kanye openly admitted on camera that he was absolutely terrified of politics and legitimately felt his life was in serious danger when he wore the Trump hat in certain situations. He tells White House staff members that he urgently needs to come inside the building for his personal safety because he legitimately fears someone might harm him. So let's be clear about what this means. He was actively promoting and defending political views that he himself was simultaneously too frightened to publicly support in certain environments or situations.
The contradiction is absolutely staggering when you really break it down. He's willing to burn professional bridges, destroy personal relationships, and completely tank his entire career for political beliefs that he's simultaneously too genuinely frightened to fully embrace in certain public spaces. It's like watching someone deliberately set their entire house on fire to prove they're not afraid of flames, while simultaneously running to grab a fire extinguisher because they're actually terrified. The most explosive and viral moments in the entire documentary come from scenes where Kanye aggressively directs his anger toward the Kardashian family, particularly in a confrontation that shows Kris Jenner completely breaking down in tears. We see Kanye literally screaming at Kim's mother, angrily demanding that she publicly admit their family is directly responsible for all his mental health problems. It's genuinely painful to watch because you can see Kris desperately trying to reach him emotionally, telling him repeatedly that she loves him and desperately wants him to get proper help, while Kanye becomes increasingly agitated and progressively more disconnected from any sense of reality. In this confrontation, Kanye literally tells Kris Jenner directly to her face that he would rather be dead than continue taking his prescribed medication, and he aggressively demands that she take full responsibility for his current mental state. Kris, visibly crying with actual tears, admits that the family may have had some effect on his mental health over the years, but she tries desperately to explain that what random strangers say on the internet genuinely shouldn't matter to him. What actually matters is that the people close to him genuinely love him and desperately want him to be okay. It's one of the rawest, most genuinely heartbreaking scenes in the entire documentary, and it perfectly illustrates just how completely impossible Kanye had become to help in any meaningful way. He wasn't genuinely looking for support or understanding. He was desperately looking for someone to blame for his problems. If you're still watching at this point and haven't subscribed yet, I'm genuinely starting to question your life choices. Hit that button so I know you're a real person and not just a bot wandering through YouTube. The film then follows the entire family on an organized trip to Uganda, which was clearly intended to function as some kind of intervention or healing experience for everyone involved. But even there, surrounded by people who genuinely love him in a peaceful setting far away from media pressure, Kanye's paranoia is completely running the show and controlling every interaction. Kim is captured on camera looking visibly emotional and desperate, sitting with people close to Kanye and practically begging him to recognize that he wasn't behaving like this just a couple of years earlier. She's pleading with him to actually listen to the people who care about him, reminding him that she constantly gets told no in her work and personal life, and she doesn't respond by aggressively lashing out at everyone around her. This Uganda trip footage is particularly devastating because you're literally watching Kim's final desperate attempt to save their marriage play out in real time on camera. She's not being dramatic for content or trying to create a storyline. She's genuinely trying to reach the man she fell in love with and built an entire family with. But Kanye's paranoia had progressed to such an extreme point that he couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even his own wife, who was clearly doing absolutely everything in her power to help him. After the Uganda trip concluded, there was a brief period where things appeared to settle down temporarily. Kanye deliberately stepped back from political commentary, entered his Sunday service era, and even renewed his wedding vows with Kim in an intimate ceremony. The documentary presents this period as Kanye successfully rebranding himself as spiritually reborn and more grounded in his Christian faith. But looking back now, with the benefit of hindsight and knowing what happened next, it feels more like the deceptive eye of a hurricane. That brief moment of calm before everything gets exponentially worse than before. This religious rebrand was clearly strategic and carefully calculated. Kanye knew his political comments had seriously damaged his public image and cost him opportunities, so he pivoted hard into Christianity as a deliberate way to rehabilitate how people perceived him.
The Sunday service events were carefully choreographed spectacles specifically designed to make him appear spiritual, stable, and emotionally centered. But the documentary brutally reveals that behind all the gospel music and the endless beige outfits, absolutely nothing fundamental had actually changed. He was still the exact same paranoid, medication-refusing person who had just discovered a more publicly acceptable way to present himself to the world. It was a costume change and image makeover, not a genuine transformation.
But by 2020, the carefully constructed mask came off again when Kanye suddenly announced his presidential run. The documentary shows him becoming increasingly obsessed with building this utopian new world in Wyoming, constantly experimenting with sustainable Yeezy projects and architectural concepts that seemed less like actual viable business plans and more like the disconnected fantasies of someone who had completely lost any touch with reality. His public statements during this period became increasingly erratic and genuinely harmful to various communities, causing absolute chaos online and forcing longtime fans to seriously question whether they could morally continue supporting someone whose behavior was becoming more unhinged and dangerous by the day. The final nail in the coffin of his marriage came during a campaign rally when Kanye publicly revealed that he and Kim had seriously considered not having North West during Kim's pregnancy. This wasn't just another political mistake or a poorly thought-out comment made in the moment. This was a deeply personal betrayal that Kim simply could not and would not forgive under any circumstances. The documentary shows how this single moment was the absolute breaking point for Kim, who had already spent several years dealing with Kanye's constant public meltdowns and his private paranoia. She had consistently defended him, actively protected him, and stood by him through countless controversies and difficult situations. But bringing their daughter into his political circus and revealing something that intensely private was a line she couldn't let him cross without severe consequences. Shortly after this revelation went viral online, Kim officially filed for divorce, publicly citing that they simply could not make their relationship work anymore, despite their efforts.
One of the most disturbing aspects the documentary exposes is Kanye's genuine belief that he was completely untouchable and immune to real consequences. He repeatedly spoke as if Adidas could never afford to lose him as a partner, fully convinced that he had personally made the company billions of dollars in revenue and was therefore immune to any actual consequences regardless of what he said or did. This delusion of invincibility is precisely what gave him the confidence to make increasingly outrageous statements, including his later anti-Semitic comments that would finally bring genuine consequences crashing down on him. The documentary captures Kanye literally saying on camera that Adidas couldn't possibly drop him because he was too valuable to their bottom line financially. He had genuinely convinced himself that his commercial success and financial value gave him unlimited freedom to say absolutely anything without facing any repercussions in the real world. This mindset perfectly explains why he seemed genuinely shocked and felt betrayed when companies actually started severing their partnerships with him after his White Lives Matter shirts and his anti-Semitic rants. He really believed he was positioned above consequences.
Rather than learning from these consequences and adjusting his behavior accordingly, the documentary shows Kanye doubling down on his controversial statements with even more intensity and conviction. Instead of apologizing or seeking professional help, or even just staying quiet for a period of time, he became more defiant and aggressive, seemingly completely incapable of acknowledging the real harm his words were causing to actual people and communities. The film captures his descent into complete professional isolation, as Live Nation, AEG, and even the Sphere venue in Las Vegas all publicly refused to work with him under any circumstances. Watching his professional world collapse in real time is like watching a slow-motion car crash where the driver keeps deliberately accelerating instead of hitting the brakes to minimize damage.
But perhaps the most significant revelation from this entire documentary is how it has completely flipped public perception of Kim Kardashian's role in their relationship. For years, Kanye's most dedicated fans aggressively blamed Kim for his problems, suggesting she was deliberately holding him back creatively or was somehow directly responsible for his mental health issues. They painted her as the controlling, materialistic wife who didn't understand or appreciate his artistic genius. This documentary has absolutely destroyed that narrative entirely. We're finally seeing Kim's genuine perspective on their relationship, and it reveals her as someone who spent years desperately trying to help a person who absolutely refused to be helped under any circumstances. The footage clearly shows her trauma response of staying unnaturally calm during Kanye's explosive outbursts and aggressive episodes. This wasn't coldness or lack of emotion like people assumed. This was a carefully developed survival mechanism she created to avoid making already volatile situations even worse. People are finally understanding that Kim's composed demeanor during chaotic moments wasn't evidence that she didn't care about him. It was pure self-preservation and a deliberate attempt to de-escalate situations that could spiral completely out of control at any moment.
The documentary inadvertently positions Kim as someone who actively protected Kanye's image and public reputation for years, while suffering in complete silence behind closed doors. She could have exposed his behavior and their private struggles much earlier if she wanted to. She could have sold her story to the media and controlled the narrative from the very beginning, but she consistently chose to handle their problems privately and protect him, only speaking out publicly when his actions began directly affecting their children's well-being. Even her close friends are captured on camera throughout the documentary, expressing genuine amazement at her ability to stay calm in situations that would have most reasonable people running for the exits and never looking back. They knew exactly what she was dealing with behind the scenes, and they couldn't believe she kept trying to make it work for as long as she did.
Throughout the entire documentary, Kanye struggles to articulate what his actual story even is, or what message he wants to convey. He repeatedly complains that the media wants him to discuss being bipolar and frame everything through mental illness, but he aggressively pushes back hard against that narrative and constantly reframes everything as him being misunderstood, more authentic and creative when off his medication, or being unfairly targeted by outside forces that want to control and silence him. The film shows his desperate attempts to control his own narrative while simultaneously being completely trapped by his own documented actions and his stubborn refusal to accept help or criticism from anyone who genuinely cares about him. Kanye is clearly aware that people naturally interpret his outbursts as symptoms of untreated mental illness, but he resists that explanation with everything he has because he doesn't want to be defined or limited by it. Instead, he frames his behavior as intentional, political, spiritual, or visionary, anything but a mental health crisis that requires professional treatment and prescribed medication. This resistance to getting help becomes the thread that connects all of his self-destructive behavior throughout the entire film. Every bridge he deliberately burned, every relationship he permanently destroyed, every opportunity he sabotaged can be traced directly back to his refusal to accept that he desperately needed help.
The documentary ends with Kanye seemingly at peace with everything he's lost. His marriage to Kim, his business partnerships worth billions of dollars, his friendships, and a significant portion of his fan base. He appears to have accepted that his stubborn refusal to compromise or seek professional treatment has cost him practically everything that actually mattered in his life. But here's the genuinely tragic twist. He frames this massive loss as a price he was willing to pay to remain true to himself and his beliefs. It's a genuinely tragic ending because you realize that Kanye views his isolation and loss not as consequences of terrible decisions, but as proof of his authenticity and unwillingness to compromise his vision. He's convinced himself that losing everything somehow means he won some kind of moral victory, when in reality, he's just a man who chose his delusions over his relationships, his health, his family, and his future. He sacrificed everything real and tangible for something completely imaginary.
The most ironic outcome of this entire documentary is that it completely backfired on Kanye's attempt to control his narrative and make people understand his perspective.
Instead of generating sympathy for his struggles or validating his claims about being misunderstood and unfairly targeted, it has done the exact opposite. People are walking away from this film feeling genuinely sorry for Kim Kardashian, impressed by Kris Jenner's patience and unconditional love, and absolutely horrified by Kanye's behavior and his treatment of people who cared about him. The documentary he personally authorized to tell his side of the story ended up being the most damning evidence against him. All right, if you made it this far without subscribing, you clearly have commitment issues. But I respect the dedication to consuming free content. Hit that button before you forget, because your memory is apparently questionable.
This documentary serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when mental health issues go untreated and when someone's inner circle enables destructive behavior in the name of loyalty or love. It's a harsh reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is set firm boundaries, even if it means walking away completely. Kim Kardashian finally learned that painful lesson, and the world is finally understanding why it took her so long to get there. She didn't give up easily or quickly. She fought for that marriage and for the father of her children longer than most people would have under similar circumstances. This has been one of the most complex and heartbreaking celebrity stories of our generation, and this documentary captures it all with unflinching, uncomfortable honesty. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about this entire situation and whether you've watched the documentary yourself. I'll be back soon with more celebrity chaos because apparently that's what we're all here for. Peace.